One of the most terrifying things that I ever did was share my truth about my history. I remember the first time that I openly talked about who I was, what I had done, and what I had been through. And while there were so many people, obviously local to me, that witnessed it, it still felt like I could keep it a secret. And there was so much shame around the choices that I had made, who I was, everything leading up to what was created, and making the decision to talk about my story, to be open and honest about what I had been through, was not a decision that came naturally or felt light to make. But I truly think and believe, I should say that I know that sharing my story is the reason why I am where I am. Living my story is why I am who I am. And in working with so many successful, high achieving women, we're very buttoned up and can be and feel so pressured to be professional and not show certain parts of ourselves. I mean, in some instances, I think we're moving past this now, but even like the messiness of motherhood is something that you're not supposed to show or is not professional. And it's never sat well with me that to be seen as a professional, to be taken seriously, we have to uphold a certain appearance. And I think it leads a lot of people to be very performative. But today, on this episode of Mom Founders Table, we're talking about one of the most important things for your leadership, and that is vulnerability. And this is the scariest thing to lean into. It is the hardest to do well, if you will. And it can also be the thing that truly changes your life, as it changed mine. So if you're new here, maybe you don't know my story. Maybe you don't know where I came from. Maybe what you see now is the success that I've built and the happiness that I have and everything that is wonderful in my life today. But I have all of that because of my experience in my life and who I was and the decisions that I made that got me into a lot of trouble and the decisions that I made to get out of that. So to keep it brief, I was the typical party girl in a lot of people's view. But for me, I was struggling. I was coping emotionally with drugs and alcohol and sex and partying and trying to numb every single part of me that I could with those things. It didn't help that I worked for the hospitality industry for a really long time, which I believe is such a important part of our foundation, like especially being a service provider now. I think there was a lot of roots that were placed from being in hospitality. But all of that being said, my decisions in this lifestyle that I was living led me to being arrested 3 times. And it was the third time that was the rock bottom. It was the third time that change finally came afterwards. And I attribute that change to that third time being the first time that I took responsibility, that third arrest being the time that I finally realized that I was where I was because of my own actions, and I stopped blaming everyone and everything around me. And it was because of that ownership and that responsibility and no longer choosing to be a victim of my circumstances that I was able to create a foundation and build on that foundation to where I am. I think that my story works as an advantage to me because I understand hardship. I understand it at a deep, deep level. And so because of that, vulnerability is something that I didn't know I would be gifted at, but it is something that I find that now, after years of practicing and leaning into what vulnerability can create and teaching that to my clients in different ways, it is such a skill that we need to possess as leaders. It is such a necessary part of our continued growth. And so I was arrested 3 times. I changed my life because I took ownership of my decisions and knew that I could make different decisions. And I chose to share about my choices, my story, and continue to share when I fail and when I fall and when things are hard, because we all need the reminder that we're human. And so this facade that we feel as professional women, to be buttoned up, to present ourselves a certain way, to speak a certain way, to look a certain way, the heaviness that we feel is a lot of times it feels out of our control, but in reality, it's within our control. And so today we're going to talk about vulnerability and why it matters and how you can lean into it. But more than anything, I just want you to know that and give you permission and a reminder that being a professional and being taken seriously and doing things just because you think it's what you're supposed to do to get validation or approval from other people is going to leave you feeling empty. And this is why, if you are a successful, high achieving, high earning business owner, there sometimes is still this empty feeling of it not being enough. You get that feeling because you're seeking connection. Your heart and your body knows that you aren't being seen. You aren't understood. You aren't fully being yourself. There are parts of you that you feel like you need to hide. And so it is important that we lean into vulnerability. And I also want to preface this after giving you permission to be vulnerable in all areas of your life, including your work specifically. I want to also say that vulnerability is not sharing your hardships for attention. There is a difference in what we share and how we share it. I do not go on social media and give every single detail of every single time I'm having a hard time. We all process differently. We all, have different comfort levels in what we share. But again, there is this desire to be seen and be heard and be understood that we all have as humans. And so I think there is a difference in emotionally dumping your hardships for attention and going through hardship, processing that hardship, pulling lessons from that hardship, and then being able to say, hey, I was there too, and this is what I learned, and this is how I can encourage you. Or, hey, I'm having a hard time too. So that's just important to note, because I feel like that a lot of times we are black and white thinkers, we're extreme. I'm not asking you as a leader to start pouring your personal details out to your team. What I am saying is that if you want to be a better leader, then we have to create more connection between you and the people around you. And vulnerability is the thing that creates that connection. So what I want you to understand is vulnerability is an essential part of leadership. It is an essential part that is often being ignored because of the reasons that I've stated, with us feeling like we need to uphold a certain facade. The reality of this is that by upholding ourselves as what we are calling professional, we are cutting people off. We are giving our team members less buy-in to our vision. And we are truly putting ourselves in a position to be and feel alone. And loneliness is not what we're meant for. Loneliness is one of the biggest drivers of depression, right? So what you have to understand here is that vulnerability is going to lead to stronger relationships. And what we want as humans is to have strong connections with people. So embracing our vulnerability is going to help us with that desire to belong. So if you think about your team members, if you create in your team a hierarchy where you are a dictator, where it is authoritarian style, whether that's in your team or with your children, if you are always talking down to them, if you are placing yourself or they are placing you up on a pedestal, they will not feel comfortable sharing certain things with you. And if they don't feel comfortable sharing certain things with you, there could be ideas and collaboration that are being missed. There could be problems that are happening that you don't get brought to you because they're afraid. And so vulnerability in you allowing yourself to show the human side of you opens that connection and can open that communication for them, which creates a more collaborative team. And we want a more collaborative team because when we have a more collaborative team, not only do we get better success in business, but it also takes so much pressure off of us when we have team members who are excited about their work because they feel like they have creative freedom. When we have people who know that they can come to us with ideas or solutions to problems, regardless of what their position is in the business, that helps them and it helps you. And so vulnerability in this instance that we're talking about is when you're in conversation with people, let those walls down a little bit. Instead of being so direct or so short or being scared to say, hey, I've had a hard time too, or ask certain questions, understand that when you create that barrier is felt physically and mentally. So when you have better communication because your team feels safe communicating with you, then you have more innovation. And isn't that what we want as leaders? We don't hire people simply to tell them what to do, simply to offload and delegate work. Yes, we want support, but so much of the support that we're seeking is not just in the doing. It's actually having somebody to have conversations and create ideas with. So are you being the type of leader that makes people feel comfortable sharing those things with you? So here's some actual ways that you can start implementing more vulnerability into your leadership. Remember that humans like humans. So while you may be their boss or you may be their mom, right? People who like you are going to feel more comfortable with you. And while we don't need to be people pleasers and we have to have hard conversations with our team, and there will be times that our kids or our team members may not like what we have to say, who we are, those are different things, then it's different, right? So it's not about them liking everything that we do. Imagine if our kids liked everything that we do. We would have a lot of chaos, right? More than we do because there's only so much we can control with them, right? So for your team members, it's the same. It's not about making decisions or having conversations to get them to like everything that you say. It's about being who you are and forming a relationship around character and values and actually liking the human behind the brand. So humans like humans. Remembering that in itself is like when you go into your conversations over the next week, over the next month, and you're conversating with somebody and you ask them, how are you? And they're like, oh, great. It's like, how are you really doing? I will often ask my team members, what are you really enjoying right now? What are you not enjoying right now? I like to ask those deeper level questions. I like to know what is going on and how they're feeling about their work. Because if we're not asking creative questions, then we're going to get the same answers. So we can ask better questions. We can understand that not only do we need to ask better questions, but also you need to be a better listener. A lot of times we're so caught up in the busyness of the day to day that we ignore the signs or the communications that are coming in that are signs of something not going well. So asking questions, but also actively listening to what people are saying, because there is a moment in almost every single conversation where you can find a point of relatability or resonance. I remember last time I worked on that, that was really frustrating. It doesn't always have to be a big story. It can just be a moment of me too, a moment of, oh man, I struggled with that too. Those kinds of moments where we show our side of, oh man, I put on 2 different shoes today. Like, instead of being horrified by it, it's like, how funny is that? It's permission giving for them to be human too. So don't just talk at people, ask questions and then listen. And listen for what they're really saying. Another way to make sure that there is vulnerability in your leadership is continuing to foster a supportive environment. So whether it's in your day-to-day communications or in your meetings, what I want you to think about is the plastic couch versus the regular couch, right? So if you walk into a house and all the furniture is covered in plastic, you're going to feel like, wow, okay, I'm not allowed to touch anything. If you walk into a house and there's a comfortable couch and they, offer you some coffee or some tea, take a seat, invite you in, you're going to feel much different. And so the question to ask yourself right now is, which way does your business feel? When your teams are signing into work, whether they're remote or in office, do they feel comfortable? Do they feel safe? Do they feel like they can come and talk to you? And when they do come and talk to you, do they feel like you'll listen? Do they feel like you'll listen and it will be a productive conversation and turn into change? You don't want a business covered in plastic. When we're talking about longevity and sustainability, you want people to be comfortable. You want people to feel like they're being seen and being heard. And the best way to help them do that is by you being an example of it. So some questions for you to really think about and reflect on as you are recognizing, okay, this is I've been a little buttoned up. I've been afraid to say things a certain way. I have been putting a lot of pressure on myself to always keep it professional. Here's some questions that I want you to think about. Actually, before I get into those questions, one last kind of asterisk here is that providing comfort and vulnerability to create that collaborative environment and open communication does not mean a lack of boundaries. Because once again, I feel like I always have to speak to the extremes because it's so easy for us to swing one way or the other, right? I'm not asking you to dish out all your dirty laundry, and I'm also not asking you to have no boundaries. You probably know by now, if you've listened to any of my content at any point, that boundaries are one of the most important things that we can have. So there is a line of certain types of conversations, because I have seen leaders who create so much comfort that then they become a sounding board for their team members are whining to them or talking about other team members. And that's not what we're trying to create either. So there are boundaries that need to be set around what professionalism looks like, but I also would like for you to revisit what that looks like for your business and make sure it's things that really matter. In conversation, we don't want to promote any sort of communication that is downgrading somebody else on the team or speaking poorly about someone, but we also can, wear what we want to wear, do our hair how we want to do it, or be able to talk about our kids or certain subjects. So just understand where those lines are and make sure that you and your team are clear on what those lines are. So first question for you to think about is just assessing how comfortable you are being vulnerable. For most of my clients, it's not an area of comfort at all. It's very uncomfortable for them to talk about anything that they currently see as a flaw or failure. And knowing where you are and assessing is always going to be the first step, right? Just having awareness, then we can create change. So how comfortable are you right now with being vulnerable? Maybe you're being too vulnerable, right? Maybe you are dishing too much out to your team. Maybe you are somebody who's, created a very comfy couch that now people are you have roommates that aren't paying. That's another extreme that we can go to here, right? So just have awareness of where you are. And then recognize for your leadership, for your team, for your business, and even in your home, how could vulnerability enhance your business? How could vulnerability enhance your current leadership? How would it create more innovation for your business? How would it help your team? How would it help you? And then think for your business specifically, what steps can you take to cultivate that culture of openness, right? Can we pull back on hours and create a little more flexibility? Can we put in an open door communication policy? There's a variety of things that we can do on a structural level that promote this type of environment. And then the last question I would have you think about is, what are you actually afraid of, right? So when we're not sharing something that we are ashamed of, right? Or if we're not sharing something, it is usually because we are afraid. And so figuring out what are we afraid will happen if I share, and then asking, is that reality? Right? Because fear, we can spiral and make up these stories in our head. And for business, it's so interesting because I have built my platform off my story and showing other people it doesn't matter who you were or what you've done, but you can build a life that is beautiful. And had I never leaned into that, I wouldn't be here. But at the same time, I was scared to share that because I was ashamed. Like, oh, these people, I could just pretend, right? That I am, this like fitness influencer, coach, whatever, gym owner. And that feels easier to just be that. They don't need to know about this other part of me, but it's a part of me and it made me who I was. So what are you afraid of? And how accurate is it that it's something, whatever you think would happen from sharing would actually happen? And here's what I want you to do. I want you to have regular check-ins with your team members to where you are encouraging open communication. And I want you to get clear on what exactly that looks like for your business. For my business, anybody that joins my team, we have an open communication policy. And what this means is that you are required to, if you are struggling or having a hard time or having a great time, you are required to communicate that. Obviously, how much you communicate, again, everybody has different comfort levels. But we want to know if you're having a hard time, tell us so that we can pick up any slack. If you're having a great time, tell us so that we can celebrate with you. So make sure that you are encouraging open communication. The next thing to do is be an example. Practice vulnerability by sharing your stories, share your struggles, share what you've overcome, share the challenges. When you do your team meetings, say, hey, last week I was really struggling with this thing, and then this happened, and this is what I learned. And it's so silly to say, but I think that sometimes as leaders, we forget people are looking to us and they forget that we struggle. They forget that we're human. So share your personal story, share your challenges, and share those, during team meetings or one-on-one meetings with your team. And then lastly, make sure that you are consistently seeking feedback, right? A lot of times I will have clients who, I ask my team, like if they, for any feedback, and they just don't give me anything. First, we need to ask better and more specific questions. But if they don't feel comfortable sharing actual feedback with you or giving you constructive criticism, they won't. So it's really important. Like, I will ask this specific question of like, what can I do better? I will say openly, I didn't feel like I was a great leader this week. I did not give you full clarity on that. And so there are ways to make sure that that pathway is open. The more closed off that we are, the more people are going to not give us that feedback. And feedback from inside your team, the people that see all the ins and outs of what's happening, is so, so valuable. So make sure that you are seeking that feedback. Make sure that you are being a person that can take that feedback, right? And not get defensive and process that and not be reactive. And make sure that you're instilling policies that make them feel comfortable sharing that with you. So we know from today that continuing to grow our businesses, continuing to impact people and have strong teams is going to require a new or different level of vulnerability to create the connection that we need. There is so much value in that connection and so much that is fulfilling in our work when we create it. So I really would like for you to think about the questions that I asked today and also see how you can implement these new strategies into your business or into your home even. It really applies both places. So thank you guys for listening. I hope that my story inspires you to be more vulnerable with the people around you. And as a reminder that you don't have to be so buttoned up and uptight all the time. So thank you for listening. Please tag me on social media when you are listening at the Mom Founders Table on Instagram. If you are seeking to build a more freedom and flexibility based business, make sure that you have downloaded the Female Founders Freedom Framework. The link for that is in the show notes. And next week, we are talking all about strategically scaling to not induce more stress. This is the tipping point for a lot of people where we struggle with, I want to grow more, but wow, I do not see how I can do it with how stressed out and overwhelmed I am. So we're going to talk about that next week. But once again, please tag me on social. Send me any sort of feedback that you have for me, any topics that you want to hear, any questions that came, anything that you guys give me. I appreciate so, so much. So thank you again for listening, and I will talk to you guys next week.